Good morning, students, and warm welcome to all of you. And this is Basavaraj. So we'll be continuing the ecology and environment session, and in that we were discussing about global warming and climate change. So I'll be continuing the global warming and climate change, what we left yesterday, from where we have left yesterday. From there, I'll be continuing. So just confirm that I'm audible as well as visible to you all. Done. So okay. So yesterday we made an effort in understanding the chronology of the events which started from 1960s. The events which started from 1960s, and there we made an effort in understanding the first international conference was something called as Stockholm Conference, and that Stockholm Conference is very important because that is the first international event. That is the first international event which brought the global warming and climate change into the international framework. And apart from that, it also made a relationship, it also created a relationship between the economic development and environmental concern. Very important point it highlighted. Economic development and environmental concerns both are the two faces of the same coin. It highlighted that part. And after that, brand report was there. Brand report, which created something called as an imaginary line, which highlighted the economic disparities between the two countries, that is global north and global south. North and south. So north are something which are referred as the most developed countries, and the south are something which we refer them as the developing countries. So it created the economic disparities, north and south. Then after that, Brundtland Commission was set up by United Nations General Assembly. And this United Nations General Assembly wanted to make sure that all the countries of the world, developed as well as developing countries, should come forward and give their strategies in the context of the present issues, what the entire world was facing. We refer that as a climate change perspectives, right? And it asked the commission, Brundtland Commission, to check what the brand report has said and what should be the strategies taken so that we can make an assessment and settlement of the climate change issues. And it submitted its report in the year 1987, called as Brundtland Report, with a title called as Our Common Future. And in that Brundtland Report, it highlighted something called as Sustainable Development World. And I told that sustainable development is a term. It means that we should also reap the benefit, and the next generation should also reap the benefit. It is not about only protecting and conserving. While protecting and conserving, we should also reap the benefit, and the next generation should also get the benefit of that. So this concept was introduced there, that present generation should also reap the benefit, and the next generation should also reap the benefit without degrading the environment. So that concept was significantly highlighted from 1987. And this sustainable development concept, it consists of three components. And these three components you should always keep in the mind. One is that it always talk about economic development. Economic development should be there. But this economic development, what we are doing, should take into consideration of environmental concern. Environmental concern is also very, very important. So economic development with environmental concern, and both should make a very strong impact on reducing the barriers, reducing the disparities, making the peoples of the world to fight and come into one platform, reducing poverties, enhancing their knowledge base, providing good life, providing them good medical facilities. All those are required, and that is referred as social equity. Social equity. So these are the three terms which you should remember at any time whenever you are writing any answer on sustainable development. If a development is referred as sustainable, if it is doing economic development, environmental concern, and social equity, if it is performing all the three, if it is performing all the three, then only we refer that as sustainable development. Or else, if any one of them is lacking, then we don't call that as a sustainable development. Is that clear? So please remember this sustainable development. Now we'll move from here. So we had an idea that the world was having a major impact of climate issues. And that's what we needed, a scientific institute which can make the science based calculation and science based data, which can add, which can provide, which can give the scientific assessment to the climate change. And these inputs will be very, very important to assess and make the future strategies in the context of climate change. And that is the reason why. That is the reason why we created something called as Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change in the year 1988. And this is created by two organizations, United Nations Environment Program and World Meteorological Organization. And the major idea of this is it provides the regular scientific assessment on climate change, and it always provides science related data to the climate change. And the inputs of this IPCC are very important to make the strategies, to make the strategies with reference to climate change, global warming, or any issues. And whatever inputs which are given by the IPCC, they are always discussed. They are always discussed and negotiated when the conferences are held, whenever the conference of parties are held, COPs are held. And they are also used to make the plans in the future action. They also are important to make the plans, or we say future action. Future action in the context of the climate change. So hence, this IPCC plays a vital role. It plays a vital role in the context of providing the inputs in the present scenarios of climate change, global warming, all such issues, right? And the assessment reports are very, very significant. And this IPCC has given 6 assessment reports. It has given 6 assessment reports, which are very important in the context of climate change. And also, IPCC provides special reports when they are requested by any institutions. It also provides special reports. Special reports. If any organization requests, that with concern to the climate change. So it provides special reports, and it has submitted 6 assessment reports as well. So this is something about IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Now, this IPCC in the year 1988, it started making the findings, started making the assessments. And in the year 1989, United Nations General Assembly, UNGA, United Nations General Assembly, it decided that why don't we bring all the countries of the world in one platform to discuss the major issues and ask the strategies of them. So it decided, it thought that why don't we bring all the countries of the world, all the countries of the world, developed countries, developing countries, all the countries of the world, and we will discuss the present issues, to discuss the present issues, and also take the feedback of them, what they are facing in the developed country and developing countries like India, Brazil, Pakistan, or any such countries, developing countries. So what problems they are facing, and we have to get an experience of them. And when we work with developed and developing countries, then we may come out with strategies, and these strategies can help in finding a solution for the present issues like global warming, sustainable development, poverty issues. So hence an effort was done by United Nations General Assembly to have a world conference, all the countries of the world to meet and discuss the future strategies. And this response was very positively taken by all the countries of the world. And the response was very excellent. And this response was done in the year 1992. In the year 1992, where all the countries of the world met on the response of United Nations General Assembly in a place called as Rio. In the place called as Rio. Rio. And this meeting, which was held in the Rio, is referred as Earth Summit. Earth Summit. Or it is also referred as United Nations Conference on Environment and Development. Or it is also referred as Rio Summit. Rio Summit. All the three names are same. All the three names are same. Earth Summit, to discuss the issues of the earth and to find the strategies. Rio Summit, the place where it was done. And the major agenda is to understand the environment and development issues. Right. So hence it is a very significant event which was in the year 1992. And the theme of that is environment and sustainable development. The theme of this event was environment and sustainable development. And after this event, the major outcomes are very, very important here. Major outcomes. Now, what are the major outcomes here? The first one is it made a plan, policies, and strategies for environment and economic development. So, in this, plans were made, strategies were made, policies were made, to make sure that environment and development are doing side by side, to protect the environment and also to make economic development. So these policies, these strategies, these plans, which considered both into the criteria economic development as well as environmental concern, is referred as Rio Declaration. Rio Declaration. So strategies, plans, policies for environmental concern and development was the outcome. Rio Declaration. The second one is Agenda 21. Now, what is this Agenda 21? So here 21 refers to the 21st century. 21 refer to 21st century. Now, what is this agenda? Agenda is of sustainable development. Agenda of sustainable development. Sustainable development. So whenever the word sustainable development is there, you should remember three components. Three components: environment, equity, and economic part. So here, 21st century and sustainable development. So it means that Agenda 21 means that it is the blueprint of sustainable development for 21st century. It is the blueprint of sustainable development. Sustainable development for 21st century. 21st century. So sustainable development means reducing poverty, enhancing women's empowerment, reducing gender inequality, providing knowledge base, reducing economic disparities, taking consideration of weaker section. All these are the part of the sustainable development. All these are part of the sustainable development. And these all are the results of climate change. They all are the results of the climate change which were seen. So we have to reduce the barriers. We have to reduce the disparity. So that's why social equity also taken the main platform. So along with these two, three conventions were also are the outcome of that. Three conventions were also are the outcome of this. So 2 declarations and 3 conventions. 2 declarations and 3 conventions. So what are these 3 conventions? The first one is United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC. United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And the countries which have signed that, they are referred as the governing bodies of that convention, and they are referred as conference of parties which have signed that, signed the convention. And then CBD, Convention on Biological Diversities. And the countries which have signed that, we refer them as conference of parties for CBD. Then United Nations Convention on Combating Desertification. So 3 important conventions were signed. 3 were signed. Now understand, UNFCCC, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, it is not legally binding. Not legally binding. Not legally binding. Then the conference of parties meet every year. Meet every year. So this should be kept in the mind. Then second one is CBD, Convention on Biological Diversity. This is legally binding. This is legally binding. And this CBD has 2 protocols. Convention on Biological Diversity has 2 protocols. This we have already discussed. One is called as Cartagena Protocol, and second one is Nagoya Protocol. Nagoya Protocol. And the conference of parties to CBD, they meet once in 2 years. Once in 2 years. The conference of parties meet once in 2 years. Then United Nations Convention on Combating Desertification. United Nations Convention on Combating Desertification, the third convention. And this is legally binding. This is legally binding. And the conference of parties, so they are the one which are meeting once in 2 years. Meet once in 2 years. So this is what you should keep in the mind. UNFCCC, CBD, and UNCCD conventions. Right. So separate protocols. So they will be having separate protocols. The countries are also different. They may be overlapping countries. But their objectives are different. Their conventions are different. The names are different. You don't find the same criteria. They have different criteria. One talks on climate change. The other talks on the issue of biodiversity. The third talks on the issue of desertification. 3 conventions, 3 different issues. UNFCCC talks on the issue of climate change. CBD talks on the issue of biodiversity. And UNCCD talks on the issue of desertification. Now, when the 3 issues are different, then how the 3 convention can be same? When the 3 issues are different, then their approaches are different, their conventions are different, their strategies are different, and hence the conference of parties which are signed them are also different one. They may be overlapping. Like India has ratified UNFCCC, India has ratified CBD, and India has ratified UNCCD also. There are many countries which have signed or ratified only one. Right? So COPs are different, their agendas are different, their functions are also different. Is that clear? So this is what you should keep in the mind. You always, when you are reading, read them separately. The CBD we have done. So whenever you are reading CBD, make a note of that. What are CBDs? What are 2 protocols? Then along with that, you link CMS and sites. So entire CBD is done. Entire biodiversity is done. So CBD, Nagoya Protocol, Cartagena Protocol, sites, and CMS. So international approach of biodiversity is covered in that. Then today we will be discussing UNFCCC and UNCCD. Right. Now, there is something called as the conference of parties. So I told you in the last weekend, but still remember, it is group of the nations which have signed the convention. signed the convention, and they are referred as the decision making body, supreme decision making body to the particular convention, particular agenda. Convention means particular agenda or convention. And they meet periodically, either once in a year, once in 2 years, or once in 3 years, like CITES and CMS. In both CITES and CMS, yesterday we discussed CITES and CMS. So both they meet once in 3 years. They meet once in 3 years, right? Then they always assess the progress which is done by them and make sure that what strategies can be taken there, right? So it is a platform to discuss the global progress, platform to discuss the global progress. So this is what the COP is. Every convention will have their own COP. Every convention will have their own COPs, and every convention will have their own set of objectives, strategies, right? Now, if any country has ratified that, it means that the country is bound to get technical assistance and financial assistance from these conventions. And hence a fund was also set up. A fund was also set up, which is referred as Global Environment Facility Fund. Global Environment Facility Fund, and the year of 1992. So this Global Environment Facility Fund, it provides financial assistance to the developing countries and the countries whose economies are transition. Those which have made ratification or agreement to the environmental concerns there. And this fund is jointly managed by United Nations Development Program, World Bank, and United Nations Environment Program. Now, it provides financial assistance to which conventions? It provides financial assistance to 3 conventions of Earth Summit, that is UNCCD, CBD, and UNFCC. 3 conventions of Earth Summit, plus 2 conventions which are associated with pollution. 2 conventions which are associated with pollution, that is Minamata Convention for mercury pollution and Stockholm Convention for persistent organic pollutant. So these 2 conventions with pollution plus the 3 conventions of the Earth Summit. So it provides financial assistance to 5 conventions. Those countries which are signed to that. So it provides financial assistance to these many countries, right? Now, next we'll discuss about UNCCD, United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. Now here, if you take the present condition of the earth, due to increasing of the population, we are overexploiting the resources. Overexploitation is done. And that overexploitation of resources is degrading the ecosystem, and that in turn is converting the fertile areas into deserts. So much of the earth's areas are converting into deserts. Desertification or deserts, right? And desertification means that it is the degradation of the land. Degradation means where the productivity decreases. Degradation means the productivity decreases. Productivity of the land decreases. Productivity of the land, when it decreases, we refer that as land degradation. It may not provide yield. It may not make all the functions which are necessity for the soil, right? So such conditions we refer them as land degradation, right? So much of the earth is moving towards that desertification and land degradation in the arid and semi-arid areas, and an effort was needed to make sure that this desertification should be reduced, stopped, and reversed back. So hence an international convention was signed, which is referred as United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. It is the only international convention. Sole means only international convention which links the environment with sustainable development and land management. Only world's legal convention which links the environmental concern with the land development. And the significance of this is it is bottom up approach. It means that local governance, local people are the part of policy. Local people, local people or local authority. So they are the part of the policy. They are part of the policy making. So that when the local people are involved, then it will be very effective in implementing, effective in the results. So hence, they decided that we will meet once in 2 years, and discuss about the desertification issue and what strategies has to be done here to reduce that. And the last meeting which was held was COP15 in 2022. But before that, COP14 was very important. COP14 was very important. The Conference of Parties 14 to UNCCD, United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. And this was held in Delhi, that is India. And out of many outcomes, one of the important outcome of COP14 UNCCD is the term called as Delhi Declaration. Is called as Delhi Declaration. Now, what the Delhi Declaration says? It says that to bring the land degradation neutrality by 2030, to make land degradation neutrality by the year 2030. So this is called as the Delhi Declaration, and it is accepted by all the countries through this convention that by 2030 we'll try to restore the lands which can start providing the benefits which it has been made of. So restoring or land degradation neutrality means restoring the lands. It means restoring the lands where they can provide the services, which were degraded by overexploitation. So restoring the degraded land and bringing them back to the life so that the economic activities will rejuvenate in those areas. So we refer that as land degradation neutrality, that is making the soil to provide its economic functions, right? So this is called as the Delhi Declaration of COP14. Very important one. Please remember this. And the 2022, which is COP15, Conference of Parties 15. So 15th meeting, COP15 means 15th meeting. So in this 15th meeting, which was held in Abidjan, Cote d'Ivoire or Ivory Coast, in this area, Abidjan, Cote d'Ivoire. So the theme was land, life, legacy from scarcity to prosperity. Now, the important outcomes of this particular event are: it made a global pledge to boost drought resilience. Now, anytime, when the resilience is there, you should always remember that this resilient words have two scopes. One is that one aspect of resilient means resistance. So drought resistant crops, right? And second aspect of that is, if they are not resisting, if they are damaged by the droughts, then they should recover quickly. That is quick recovery. So when both the terms are combined, that is resistance and quick recovery, we refer that as resilience. Is it clear? So global pledge to boost drought resilience, that is resisting to the drought and recovering quickly. Not only plants, human beings, animals, so all are affected by the drought. So we should make an effort to resist the impact of the droughts. And if somebody is affected by that, we should recover very quickly by medical facilities, by other actions, right? So global pledge to boost drought resilience and invest in the land restoration for future prosperity, so that the land will provide the economic benefits what it has been assessed of. Then it also decided that we should have an intergovernmental working group on drought for 2022 and 24, which can take the possible options, including the policy instrument and future action, right? So establishment of intergovernmental working group was there. Then global consensus on boosting the drought resilience. Global consensus on boosting the drought resilience. How? By identifying the expansion of drylands which are expanding because of unscientific methods, overpopulations, overexploitation, identifying the expansion of drylands, and improving the national policies and early warning. Now, always remember, drought is considered as a disaster. It is considered as a natural disaster, and this is accelerated by human activities. It is accelerated by human activities, right? And in all the natural disasters, along with the human activities which are involved, so here the role of weather is drastically seen. And in this disaster management, we always have pre-disaster managements are there. And within this pre-disaster management, early warning system plays an important role. Early warning plays an important role, right? So in the context of cyclones, we provide early warning by naming the cyclones and intimating to the people some 24 hours early or 2 days early. Now, in the same way, if any type of droughts are there, we have to intimate, we have to make the data available to the people in prior, so that they can make arrangement in the context of such events. So early warnings are very, very important. This early warnings are taken by having much data which were calculated by the methodologies like drought index, Palmer dot index, severity index. So many such indexes are there which can make the assessment of the area, and it can predict that what could be the drought and what could be the impact of the drought. So by that, they can make sure that at least they will make assessment of the risks. At least they will make the assessment of risk assessment. Risk means anything which is before the event. After the event, we refer that as crisis. Anything which is done before the event. Assessment which is done before the event, we refer that as risk. See, something like this. You want to put some money in any mutual funds. So before putting the money, you always calculate risk. You make risk analysis. So risk is a name which is given before the event. And after that, when you put your money, then you may find losses, and the losses are referred as crisis. So anything which happens after the event, we refer that as crisis, and anything which is before the event, we refer that as risk management. So the significance of pre-disaster management is to understand the risk and reduce the risk before the event could have happened, right? So this is where the early warnings plays an important role in identifying the possible threats and reduce and eliminate them in the initial stage itself by making proper arrangement. Is it clear? So this is something you should remember. And here the global pledge, it talks about three declaration, that is boost long term environmental sustainability, that is economic development, sustainability, and social equity. And then involving women's in the action, family members, mothers, sisters, daughters. So they should be involved in the process of combating desertification, which can be more effective, and emphasis should be done for land, life, and legacy. So here it talks about these are always in the scarcity, so we have to make all the efforts so that they can move from scarcity to prosperity. All the three they can move from scarcity to prosperity. So this is the outcome of the UNCCD, which was held in Abidjan, right? In the Abidjan, COP 15. Now, COP 16 is also decided, Conference of Parties 16, and this will be held in the month of December 2024, this year. And the country which is going to host this is Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia will host the COP 16. This is all about desertification, land degradation, and other factors. Is that clear? UNCCD, COP 15. Now, COP 16th meeting will be this year, because this is held once in 2 years. Done. Then next, we move on to United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Right. So it is an intergovernmental treaty developed to address the problems of climate change. Right. So it is a foundational climate agreement, a platform where they can discuss the climate issues. And the conference of parties which have signed UNFCCC, they meet every year. To discuss the strategies and discuss the assessment which has been done. Right. Now, this entered into force on 21st March 1994. The first conference was held in Berlin, and India hosted the 8th Conference of Parties, which was in New Delhi. And the Conference of Parties during 2020 was cancelled due to COVID. It was postponed and held in the year 2021. The last one was COP 28, which was held in Dubai. That is Dubai. And COP 21 Paris, which was in the year 2015. This is COP 28 held in year 2023. Held in the year 2023. Now, they are also given the date. That COP 29 will be held in the year 2024. And the host country of this is Azerbaijan. It will be the host country. Is it clear? Host countries. Now, we'll take up the important conventions on this. Not all the conventions, because already 28 conventions are there. So you can't discuss all the 28. So some important conventions which are associated with that we will discuss. And here, the third one is significant. We refer that as the Kyoto one. And this Kyoto is in Japan. It is in Japan. And the outcomes of Kyoto, we refer them as Kyoto Protocol. We refer that as Kyoto Protocol. Outcomes of that. And here you should remember that UNFCCC is not binding, but Kyoto Protocol is binding to those countries which have ratified. So it is legally binding. The countries which have ratified that. Now, what is COP 3 and what is this Kyoto and what is this Kyoto Protocol? Now here in this Kyoto, it was the first international effort It was the first ever international effort. International effort. And this first international effort, we say serious international effort. So you can put it in better way. It is the first ever serious international effort. Serious international effort to find a solution. To find a solution for climate change. Right. So it is the first international serious effort to find a solution for the climate change. And here it recognized that the developed countries are the major contributors of climate change. It recognized that the developed countries are the major contributors, are the major contributors of climate change. Major contributors of climate change because of their historical emission. Because of the historical emission. Historical emission means they emitted since from 1850s. And it also identified that these developed countries have the greatest capacities. These developed countries, they have the greatest capacities to reduce the emission of greenhouse gas. To reduce the emission of greenhouse gas. Greatest capacities to reduce the emission of greenhouse gas. So hence the first strategy is to control or to combat climate change. Combat climate change by reducing the emission of greenhouse gases. So that is the first strategy which was taken by United Nations Framework Convention to control or combat the climate change issue by reducing the emission of greenhouse gases. And hence it created a principle of the Kyoto. It created a principle. And this principle is referred as common but differentiated responsibility, CBDR. CBDR, common but differentiated responsibilities. Common but differentiated responsibilities. Common but differentiated responsibilities. And respective capabilities. And respective capabilities. Respective capabilities. Right. So it talks about the two terms. One is common responsibilities and differentiated responsibilities. So what is common responsibilities? What is common responsibilities? So common responsibilities are that both developed countries and developing countries, both developed countries and developing countries together should fight for the climate change issues. Both should fight for climate change issues. Together they should fight for climate change issue. Together they should fight for climate change issues. Now what is differentiated responsibilities? What is this differentiated responsibilities? Differentiated responsibilities means that the developed countries should provide financial assistance and technology or technical assistance to the developing countries. To the developing countries. So this is called as the differentiated responsibilities. So common is both the countries will fight for the impact of climate change, and differentiated responsibilities means that the developed countries will provide financial and technical assistance to the developing countries who are fighting for climate change. Developing countries who are making their role, who are involving in climate change, involving in climate change. Right. So this is something called as CBDR. And to implement the CBDR, to implement this Kyoto Protocol, they divided the countries of the world into three major groups to implement this. To implement this, entire countries of the world was divided into three main groups. They are Annex 1 countries. So what are Annex 1 countries? Annex 1 countries are the developed countries, which are the members of Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Developed countries, which were the members of Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. We refer that as OECD. OECD. And whose economies are in transition. Economies are in transition. Economies are in transition means the countries whose economies are moving from centralized, the countries economies which are centralized, they are moving towards open market. They are moving towards open market. Such countries, we refer them as economies in transition, which are moving towards open market. And these Annex 1 countries, they have to take the binding of emission of greenhouse gas. They have to take the binding of emission of greenhouse gas. Emission of greenhouse gas. Annex 1 countries. Now, Annex 2 countries. So what are Annex 2 countries? So these are also developed countries. And these are also the members of OECD. But these countries' economies are not in transition. Economies are not in transition. Now, these countries do not take any bindings. They don't take any binding of emission of greenhouse gas. But these countries will provide technical and financial assistance. These countries will provide financial and technical assistance. Technical assistance in the context of the climate change issues. Then non-annexed countries. So non-annexed 1 countries are the developing countries. Developing countries like India, Brazil, etc. So these non-annexed 1 countries, they do not have any binding, no binding. And these countries will get the technical and financial assistance. They will get the technical and financial assistance in the context of climate change issue. In the context of climate change issues. And LDC means least developed countries. Least developed countries, like poor countries of Africa. Poor countries of Africa. So they may be island countries, countries like Somalia, who are very least developed. And these least developed countries should be given more priority. Should be given more priority. Given priority in the context of climate change issues. In the context of climate change issues. So hence entire countries of the world were divided into three major groups, and the least development group is the poor countries of Africa and Asia, where they need more support in the context of the climate change, because climate change is something which is creating floods, droughts, fires. So these countries are not prepared, they are not done any industrial emission, but still the impact of climate change are felt and experienced by these countries, the island countries, and they need some protection, they need some financial assistance. So hence priority should be done to those countries in the context of combating climate change issues. So three categories were there. Now the problem started is that Annex 1 countries are many. There are more than 100 countries are there, which are referred as Annex 1 countries. More than 100 countries are there. OECD means Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. For economic cooperation and development. Right. So many countries were there in Annex 1. Now, all the countries cannot take the binding. And there are many greenhouse gases. Which greenhouse gases you have to take a binding? You can't say all greenhouse gases you should take binding. And you can't say all the countries have to take the binding. So hence, a specific was required there. A specific was required that which greenhouse gases should be reduced and which countries should take the binding of that. So hence, within the Annex 1, a subgroup was created. Within the Annex 1, a subgroup was created which will take the binding of emission of greenhouse gases. And one more annex was created which defines that which gases has to be reduced here. And that is where two annexes were created, Annex A and Annex B. Annex A outlines the 6 greenhouse gases whose targets have to be reduced. And these are referred as the 6 greenhouse gases of Kyoto Protocol. Kyoto Protocol. They are carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, hydrofluorocarbon, perfluorocarbon, and sulfur hexafluoride. So these are the 6 gases whose reduction has to be done. Now, Annex B, it is a subgroup of Annex 1. Countries of Annex 1 which have to take the limitation of reducing of greenhouse gases. So they consisted of developed countries plus also European countries. So 37 developed countries plus European Union. So totally 38 group or 38 members, they have to take the binding of emission of greenhouse gas. Binding of the emission of greenhouse gas, right? Binding of greenhouse gas. See, economies in transition means those countries which are moved from closed economy to open markets, and this is your pure economic terminology. Open market, liberalized policies, right? So closed market means there are having many in countries where still the market and everything is governed by the local policies, the government policies. They do not have exposure to the global, that is privatization or what we say liberalization perspectives. So when they make open market, we refer that as liberalized one, or when the excess is done for other countries as well. So we refer them as centralized to the open market. Right. Now, to fulfill these perspectives, a mechanism was done, and this mechanism is referred as Kyoto mechanism or flexibility mechanism, which talks about countries to meet their emission targets. Which countries? Annex B countries. Then encourage the private sector and developing countries to contribute to the emission to reduction efforts. Right. Now, this all created three market-based mechanism. Now, try to understand this in a very simple way. Right. Now, to implement the Kyoto mechanism, Kyoto Protocol or Kyoto mechanism, they created a unit which is referred as assigned amount unit. amount unit, or it is also referred as Kyoto unit. It is also referred as Kyoto unit. One assigned amount unit or one Kyoto unit. One assigned amount of unit or one Kyoto unit is equivalent to 1 ton of carbon dioxide or 1 ton of carbon dioxide equivalent. 1 ton of carbon dioxide equivalent, right? And this unit, this Kyoto unit or assigned amount unit is nothing but referred as a certificate. And this certificate has financial values. This certificate has financial values. Financial values. And we refer them as the carbon credits. Certificates, we refer them as carbon credits. Carbon credits, financial values. And the values are determined by the global parameters. They will never ask you what is the value of 1 ton of carbon dioxide. They are defined by the global parameters which are traded in the international market. So they are defined by global parameters with different constraints, which is defined by UNFCCC's policies and scientific authorities. So just remember that these certificates are the financial values which are referred as carbon credits. And the holder of these carbon credit, whoever is holding the carbon credit, he will have the right to emit, he will have, or that country will have right to emit the value of the carbon credit which he is having. Right to emit the value of the carbon dioxide or greenhouse gas. Any country who is holding that carbon credit will have right to emit the greenhouse gas or right to emit the carbon dioxide or CO2e, right? And this created purchasing and selling of carbon credit. So this created something called as purchasing and selling of carbon credits. And selling of carbon credits. And this purchasing and selling of carbon credit is referred as carbon trade. It is referred as the carbon trade. Purchasing and selling is referred as the carbon trade, right? So this is how the carbon trade was initiated in the Kyoto Protocol. Assigned amount units, financial values, carbon credits, they are nothing but tradable certificates. So carbon credits are tradable certificates. Tradable certificates which can be traded in international market. Traded in international market. Right. Any country who is holding that, they will have the right to emit the amount of the certificate what they are holding as a greenhouse gas. So this is something which we refer them as a carbon trade, which was seen in the context of Kyoto mechanism. Now, how this carbon trade was done? How this carbon trade was carried out? Now, this carbon trade was carried by something called as cap and trade. Cap means limit. Limit. So here you should remember the 38 countries, they took the binding of emission of greenhouse gas, and the cap is done to these countries. The cap means limiting their emission of greenhouse gases, and this limitation binding is done by UNFCCC, along with many other institutions, taking into consideration of the country's population, their approach, their economic activities, and other parameters. So based on many parameters, the 38 countries, they are to take the targets. So here, remember, the targets are fixed to Annex B countries. Annex B countries, which are 38 countries, to emit the emission of greenhouse gas. To emit greenhouse gas. Their targets are fixed. And this target is fixed every year. It is every year. And they are not carry forwarded. If any country has not used all its target, then it can't carry forward. So no carry forward. No carry forward. No carry forward was done. Now, how this mechanism worked? Now, this is Annex B country. Annex B country. We say this as an X. And there is one more Annex B country. One more Annex B country. We refer this as Y. So one is Annex B and one is X and one is Y. Two Annex B countries. Now the target which are given for Annex B, which is X, the target for this yearly target which are given. So take this as an example of 2012 yearly target which were given for Annex B. So Annex B can make an emission of the 20 units of greenhouse gas. 20 units of the greenhouse gas emission it can do in a year. And Annex B country, it can emit 10 units of the greenhouse gas in a year. 10 units of greenhouse gas in a year. So Annex B can emit 20 units. Annex B with Y can emit 10. Then there are other countries like developing countries. Now remember, these both are developed countries. They are developed countries. Developing countries like India, Brazil, etc. Now these developing countries, they take many projects like solar projects. They take the projects like planting the trees, afforestation, called as afforestation, bringing the policies like using electric vehicles, bringing the policies like wind energies. So by doing all these activities, these developing countries like India and Brazil, etc., they will create their own carbon credits. Developing in countries like India, Brazil, by taking these projects like solar energy project, planting the trees, electric vehicles, wind energies. By taking all these activities, they create large amount of carbon credits. They have created large amount of carbon credits, and these countries will have their targets which are fixed according to many authorities, UNFCCC and many scientific communities. So they are fixed in that. Now if you take the year 2020, now in the year 2020, if you start from January, February, March, so by the month of September, this country X has utilized by 19 units. By September, country X has utilized 19 units. And in the same way, the September, the country Y has utilized only 2 units. So it means country A has 10 units which are pending. So after this, he is having balance 8 units. And here in the country X, only 1 unit is remaining. So he can't stop his industrial activity, or he can't stop the emission of greenhouse gas. He can't close all his industries by the end of September. Why? Because his units have been ended up. So what he will do is he will purchase the carbon credit. So this country, to emit more, this country X emit after the September also, he will purchase the carbon credits either from another Annex B country, either from another Annex B country, because Annex B country has still more units which are pending. So he can purchase it either from Annex B country, or he can purchase it from a developing country, or he can purchase from a developing country, purchase from a developing country, developing country. And for developing countries, there are no targets, but the developed countries, they are having a target. So he can purchase either from another developed country, or he can purchase it either from a developing countries. So if he purchases that, then he will have the right of emitting that much of the greenhouse gas. So if he purchases, say, 3 units, then he will have the right to emit that amount of greenhouse gas. Then this country, if it has purchased 3 units, then it will have right to emit the amount which it has purchased either from another Annex B country or from developing country. So here it can purchase from Annex B or from this. Now this aspect, the Annex B country can sell its carbon credit to this, or developing country will sell its carbon credit to this. So this trade which is done between two developed countries, this trade which is done between two developed countries in this Annex B to Annex B, is referred as joint implementation, which is done between the two developed countries. And in the joint implementation, the carbon credits which are traded, we refer them by a name called as emission reduction units. We name them as emission reduction units. Emission reduction units, which are traded between the two developed countries. And if this trade is between a developed and developing country, if the trade is between developed and developing country like India, Brazil, we refer this as clean development mechanism. We name this as clean development mechanism. Clean development mechanism. And here the carbon credits which are traded, we refer them as the certified emission reductions. We refer them as certified emission reduction. So certified emission reductions are traded in the clean development mechanism between developed country and developing country. And emission reduction units are the carbon credits which are traded between the two developed countries, and we refer that as joint implementation. So joint implementation and clean development mechanism, and this entire process is referred as international emission trading. It is referred as international emission trading, which is done with cap and trade. Capping the emission of the greenhouse gas for the developed countries, that is 38 countries, which are defined in Annex B. If binding is not, then see, that is where the problem is. So that's why this strategy is not working well. So that's why we moved from this strategy to Paris Agreement. We have shifted from this to Paris Agreement. First understand this, then you give your conclusions. Understand this, then you give. So before understanding the problem, if you start writing conclusion, your answer will not have any validation. First understand what problem is, then you can identify the issues, then you can give the solution for that. So here there is no punishment which was identified in the Kyoto Protocol. No punishment was given, no punishment was identified for the countries which are not making their targets. So hence the strategy was not working very well. The strategy was not working very well. Apart from that, many countries started raising their voices that why only 38 countries? Why not the countries like China? Why not the countries like India, who are emitting more what we are emitting at present? So why they are not taking binding? Why many developed countries which are also emitting greenhouse gas more than what we are emitting, why they are not taking the bindings? So such issues were there. Why only the 38 countries? Why not other countries? Why you are not including developing countries in this context? So hence the strategy which initiated was not efficient. So that's why it was replaced by Kyoto Protocol, that we will discuss in the next part. But understand what is carbon trade and what is carbon credits. So there is a loophole in that. The loophole is that these developed countries, they have a right to purchase and sell. So there is no technically way where we can reduce the emission of greenhouse gas, because these developed countries will have sufficient finance, they will have the money, so they can purchase the carbon credits either from developing countries and developed countries, and by purchasing that they will start emitting the greenhouse gas. So this is where the strategy was having certain issues, right? So please understand the hidden aspects of these, right? Greenhouse gases are the gases in the atmosphere that raise the surface temperature of planet, right? Earth is warmed by sunlight. After that, when the radiations are emitted by the earth, we refer that as terrestrial radiation. That is your basics geography. And these terrestrial radiations are absorbed by the greenhouse gases which are present, which enhances the global warming. And this global warming is a part of climate change. Carbon credits of European Union. Yes, carbon crediting of European Union is the later which was formed. Understand this, but basic things. We are in 1990s to 2000. Understand this. What is the Kyoto Protocol says? What the Kyoto Protocol says? Annex 1 countries will provide this part, binding. Now, binding means that when they purchase the carbon credit, they are providing finance. When they are purchasing that, they are giving money to that. So when they are purchasing from developing countries, so they are when they are purchasing from developing countries, so they are giving money to the developing countries, and the developing countries are receiving financial assistance in the form of selling credits, and the developing countries are receiving finance. They are receiving finance in the form of selling the carbon credits. So developed countries cannot give financial assistance to whomsoever they love. Understand this. The developed countries cannot give the financial assistance to any country whomso they love. They have to channelize the money through this path, and this is called as carbon trade. The developing countries which have created many carbon credits, when they sell them to the developed countries, then the developed countries provides finance, that is called as financial assistance, and the developing countries, when they sell, they will receive the money from that. So the developing countries are contributing to the climate change issue, and because of this process they are getting the money. This is how the channelization of money is done in the context of Kyoto Protocol. Is it clear? So this is something which you should remember in the context of Kyoto Protocol. Emission reduction units and certified emission, yes, they are the types of assigned amount units. They are Kyoto units only. They are Kyoto units only. Understand this. So when we say emission reduction units and certified emission index, both are the Kyoto units only. Both are Kyoto units only. They are the carbon credits. certified emission reduction is a carbon credit which is traded in the clean development mechanism, the trade between developed and developing country under Kyoto Protocol. An emission reduction unit, it is a carbon credit which is traded in the joint implementation, the trade between one Annex B country with another Annex B country. So it is a trade between the two developed countries, which creates the emission reduction units. So never make any confusion. Joint implementation will create this emission reduction units. And this is between two developed countries. Two developed countries. Clean development mechanism. Clean development mechanism where certified emission reductions are traded. And this is a trade between developed and developing country. Developed and developing country. Developed and developing country. Right. Yes, even the credit tax, which we say carbon credit tax, which is there. Right. So they implement that. So that is the policies which they did in the later stages. Right. Now, carbon credit is tradable certificate or permit which has financial values of 1 ton, which is fixed by the international norms, So please remember these: clean development mechanism, joint implementation, certified emission reduction, and emission reduction units. So this is what we refer that as the Kyoto mechanism or flexible mechanism, which created three market-based mechanism, that is international emission trading, which is referred as cap and trade, which led to clean development mechanism and joint implementation. CDM means developed and developing. JI means two developed countries which are involved in the trade. So please remember them. And make sure that your data are seen with proper terminologies. Is it clear? Now, this clean development mechanism or this Kyoto Protocol, the dual objectives of the clean development mechanism. So what is clean development mechanism? It is a trade between developed country and developing country. Clean development is, it is a trade between developed country and developing country. Now this clean development mechanism has two objectives. One is it helps the developed countries to fulfill their commitment to reduce emission, that is cap and trade. So the developed countries, they have a cap. After that they will purchase the carbon credits from developing countries, and developing countries will get financial assistance in the trade. So the developing countries, they will get financial assistance in the trade, which they can use for their economic development. This is how the developed and developing countries will complete their roles in the context of Kyoto Protocol, right? And developing countries are the one which are most affected by the impact of the climate change, like floods, droughts, fires, etc. All these are seen. And that is where they needed certain financial assistance to adapt in that, to make proper arrangement for the shelters, make proper arrangement for the embankment, make some health facilities. And for that they needed a fund. And this fund which is created in the Kyoto Protocol, we refer that as adaptation fund. And this adaptation fund, it provides the finances to the projects and programs. Projects means shelters, embankments, mangrove plantation, food facilities, drought facilities, programs to reduce them, programs to reduce the impact of that to the vulnerable communities in the developing part. So this is adaptation fund, which was the result of Kyoto Protocol. Now, who will contribute to the adaptation fund? From where the contribution is done to the adaptation fund? Now, this adaptation fund will get contribution. The first one is voluntary contribution. Voluntary contribution. So voluntary contribution can be from individual, from any country, or from any group. Voluntary contribution from individual, from any group or any institution. Second one is, so when there is trade between developed and developing country, we refer that as clean development mechanism is there. So in the clean development mechanism, there is always a trade of certified emission reduction. So these carbon credits are traded here. These carbon credits are traded. These are traded. Right. Now, when they are traded, it means they will have some money. They will get some money. So 2% of the proceedings of CER will go to adaptation fund. 2% of proceedings. Proceedings means money. 2% of proceedings of the certified emission reduction will go to the adaptation fund. So please remember, 2% of the value which is raised by selling the certified emission reduction is also goes to adaptation fund, not from emission reduction units. It is only from CER. So you should remember these 2 points. These 2 points. Voluntary and 2% of proceeding of certified emission reduction goes to the adaptation fund. That's it. So please read them carefully and take them into consideration. Is it clear, or any issues in this? Yes, developed countries are like spoiled rich ones, but you don't use that language. You don't use that language. It is somewhere where you have to use a language which is reasonably good in the context of UPSC, right? Done. Yes, Atish, that statement what you made is correct regarding the sunlight and all. But always when you're writing such, you should use the terms called as terrestrial radiations. Terrestrial radiations, and that will enhance your productivity in the definition. Terrestrial radiations, right? So use the terms like them. Perfect. So this is what we refer that as carbon trade and the adaptation fund. Now, before moving down to the Paris Agreement, understand that in the context of the issue of climate change, in the context of finding a solution for climate change, the first strategy was something which we refer them as Kyoto Protocol. So in the Kyoto Protocol, the major objective was to make binding of emission of greenhouse gas. Binding of emission of greenhouse gas. And this was not for all the countries, only for that 38 countries. And this also created something called as carbon trade. And any country which possesses that carbon credit, it is having the right to emit. So many loopholes were there in that strategy. That means that they started demanding, the 38 countries, they started demanding that why you are not taking other countries which are emitting more than what we are emitting. And they are also, the developing countries are insisting that, see, you have given restriction to them, but they are purchasing and again emitting back. They are purchasing and again they are emitting back. So many tussles were there between the developed and developing countries, like what you get in WTO. So hence UNFCCC decided that this will not help us. Right? And hence what we can do is we can change the policies. Now again, when you talk about the bindings, so bindings were also not 100% bindings. So the bindings which were taken by the developed countries. So the first commitment period, if you see, the first commitment period which was taken by the 38 countries, the first commitment period was to reduce 5% of 1990 level of greenhouse gas in the time frame between 2008 to 2012. So that was the first commitment period, that they have to reduce 5% of 1990 level in the span of 2008 to 2012. So it did some 20%, 30%. It achieved 20%, to 30%. Only 20% to 30% achievement was done. And when it was ended in the year 2018, when it was ended in the year 2018, the second commitment period was there. And the second commitment period was to reduce 18% of 1990 level by 2013 to 2020. And this second commitment period was initiated in the Doha. Generally, you refer that as Doha Declaration. Doha Declaration. But the irony is that this second phase never implemented. So this was never implemented. It was never implemented. Only the first commitment phase was implemented, and that too it reached 20 to 30%. And the second commitment period was not yet started because of possible ratification which was there. So hence UNFCCC thought that if we go with this, then we will not reach to the United Nations convention where we have to reduce the climate change, and the earth was going under crisis. So hence they decided that why don't we go for a second strategy, which can be better than that of the Kyoto one. And hence they decided that we will replace the Kyoto Protocol. And hence this Kyoto Protocol is replaced by Paris Agreement from 2020. So hence this Kyoto Protocol is replaced by Paris Agreement. Paris Agreements from 2020. So hence we say Paris Agreement is a second strategy in the context of reducing the climate change issues. Yes, Paris Agreement is legally binding. Right. So now we'll try to understand this. Is it clear now the difference between Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement? So Paris Agreement has replaced the Kyoto Protocol. Now we'll take up what is Paris Agreement. So remember that the first commitment period hardly 20 to 30%, and the second commitment period has never reached. Then what is Paris Agreement? So the moment when we say Paris Agreement, this Paris Agreement, which was held in the year 2015 in the Paris, and the outcomes of this COP21 is referred as Paris Agreement. Outcomes of this we refer them as Paris Agreement. Outcomes are Paris Agreement, right? Now this Paris Agreement is legally binding. It is legally binding. Now what are the objectives of Paris Agreement? What are the objectives of the Paris Agreement? Right. Now the objectives of Paris Agreement is that we don't have to go with only 38 countries. We have to take both developed and developing countries. Both should be involved. Both developed and developing countries, both should work together. And here it means that whatever the global average temperature which is increasing, we should limit the increasing of global average temperature to below 2 degrees centigrade. Compared to pre-industrial level. That is 1850 to 1900. So this time 1850 to 1900 is referred as pre-industrial level. So the global average temperature which is increasing, try to keep it 2 degrees centigrade if possible. Keep it to below 1.5 degrees centigrade. So Paris Agreement says that limit the global average temperature to below 2 degrees centigrades compared to pre-industrial levels, that is 1850 to 1900, and if possible keep it below 1.5 degrees centigrade. That is the first point. Second is, just remember that common but differentiated responsibilities. Developed countries reaffirmed their commitment to mobilize $100 billion per year in climatic finance. Right. So this developed countries said that yes, we will provide $100 billion every year to the developing countries, to developing countries in the context of climate change. And it asked to submit the intended national determined contribution. Now remember, the preparation of intended national determined contribution is voluntary. It asked every countries to make their plan of action. Asked every country, it can be developed country or it can be developing country, any country, any country, developed or developing countries. UNFCC asked them that you provide your plan of action. You provide your plan of action. How you are going to proceed? How you are going to proceed to combat the climate change? What policies you are taking? What methodologies you are taking? What are your future aspects at regional, national, and international level? At regional, international, and national level. So, what are your plan of actions? What are your plan of actions? You have to give voluntarily to United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And these are referred as the intended national determined contributions. Every country has to give their INDCs. And it says that these INDCs, intended national determined contributions, which was in the year 2015, it says that all the countries, all the countries should submit their intended national determined contribution by 2018, by 2018. And once they are submitted, it means after 2018 they are not called as intended, they are national determined contribution. After 2018 they are referred as national determined contribution. And once the country submits NDC, once the country submits the NDC, then the submitted NDC will be legally binding. This submitted NDC will be legally binding. It means that a manager is there in a company. He will ask 10 people to give your work of action, that in the month what you are going to do. So he will not force you to write these things. So you have to make your volunteer group of actions. You will make your own actions voluntarily. He will not force you to do the things. So you have to make your plan of actions, and then you will give the plan of actions to the manager. So before giving the plan of action, it is voluntary. You can make any changes, you can make any methodology. But once you are submitted to the manager, then you are accountable to what you have assured, what you are promised. And this is what NDCs are there. So INDCs, when we say, they are voluntary. Every country have their own approach. But once you submit that, the national determined contribution will become legally binding. Once you submit that, then the NDCs will become legally binding. So remember, preparation of NDC is voluntary. UNFC can't force any country. UNFCC can't force any country to reduce or increase there. But once they submit NDC, once they submit this national determined contribution, NDCs submitted will become legally binding. The submitted NDCs will become legally binding. So it means that whatever you have promised, you have to fulfill. Whatever you have promised, you have to fulfill. That is called as NDC. Is it clear now? So asked NDCs, INDCs, and the moment when they submit, then they are referred as national determined contributions. And India has submitted NDCs in the year 2018. This is what we refer them as the Paris Agreement perspectives. Then the last one is global stock take. Global stock take means it is about assess the country's approach, what they have achieved, what they have achieved, and what are the gaps, what are the gaps, and what they will take in the future, what they have to do in the future, so that they can make the Paris Agreement a resultful one. And this global stock take, the review of that, the review of NDCs, the review of NDCs, which are submitted by the countries, will be done once in 5 years. Once in 5 years. It says that whatever NDCs you are giving, I'll review that. I'll review that. I'll review that. And based on the data what you're given, I'll check that whether they are sufficient for meeting the Paris Agreement or whether there are shortage to meet the Paris Agreement. And I'll tell that what should be included in that, what approach should be done in that. It can be done only when the countries provides their voluntary approach in the context of climate change. And this is a cycle which has to be done every 5 years. So global stock take is a cycle which has to be assessed for the country's approach. And the first global stock take was done in the year 2023. First was done in the year 2023. Why? Because when you talk about Paris Agreement, when you talk about the Paris Agreement, this Paris Agreement was adopted. It was adopted in certain date. Adopted on 12th December 2015. And this Paris Agreement, it entered into force. It entered into force. Entered into force on November 4, 2016. November 4, 2016. So that should be kept in the mind. And the first stock take will be, which was done in COP28, that is 2023. So please remember these terminologies, which are referred as the objectives of Paris Agreement. Right. So it talks about the same parameters. It talks about the same parameters, that is mitigating by using NDCs, 5 year cycles of progression, global stock taking, assessing their work, adaptation has to be done. So we'll discuss what is adaptation, but understand here. And it should also give transparency. They are to be given transparently with voluntary. So remember, the NDCs, the countries which they prepare are voluntary. But once they submit, then they become legally binding. Once they submit, then the same NDCs will become legally binding to the countries which have submitted to that. Is it clear? So please remember these aspects of the Paris Agreement. Yes, 5 year cycle. So global stock take will be 5 year cycle. And the first cycle is in the year 2023, which was done in the COP28. Which was done in COP28. $100 billion every year from 2020. Yes, $100 billion every year from 2020. It is called as climate finance. It is called as climate finance. Is that clear? So these are the objectives of the Paris Agreement. Now you can take a break of it's around 12 minutes. So we'll meet up at 11:50. We'll meet up at 11:50. Just fresh up yourself and we'll meet up at 11:50. And then you will have a lunch break from 1. We'll have a lunch break from 1. Jayant, did developed countries give $100, $100 billion? We'll discuss that. They're not given any $100 billion. So that's why we moved to a new financial instrument. So that's why if you are reading current affairs, in COP28, they told that we will replace the climate finance with new quantified goal. So new quantified means these, even though if you say Paris agreements, even though it is legally binding, but here when we say their financial assistance and all which are given, you can't punish them. You can't punish them. If they are not giving any money also, you can't punish them. So that's how the policies are framed out. That's why the policies are framed out. So they're not given $100 billion. We'll discuss that. We'll discuss that. And moreover, NDCs are also something which are not voluntary, but once you submit that, then it becomes voluntary or binding. Just take a break, then we will start the class at 11:50. Okay, welcome back to the session. Hope I'm audible as well as visible to you all, right? See, how to learn these protocols. See, protocols and conventions, you separate them. If you are reading biodiversity, you make a separate segregation of biodiversity. Don't mix biodiversity with ozone depletion. So in the ozone depletion, you have separate convention, you have separate protocols. Biodiversities are different, ozone are different. Then in climate change also, we will find the convention and protocols which are different from each other. Don't mix up. You segregate them. You write them in three different papers, and you make a skeletal of that, and that becomes easy for you to remember. Now, this is something which discussed, which we refer them as the conference of parties associated with the Paris Agreement. Then, during the Paris Agreement, which was in the year 2015, India made a strong initiation. India, along with France, India, along with France, it launched the International Solar Alliance. International Solar Alliance was launched. India, along with the France. Idea was to develop and deploy solar energy. Idea was to develop and deploy solar energy. Solar energy, right? International Solar Alliance was launched in the year 2015, that is during Paris Agreement, during the Paris Conference, during Paris Conference, right? Objective is to make sure that 1000 gigawatts of solar generation energy, and to get $1,000 billion in solar energy by 2030, that is mobilize the resources, mobilize the resources. And International Solar Alliance was launched, and its headquarter is in India, that is Gurugram. Gurugram. Initially, when it was launched, initially when it was launched, only the tropical countries were allowed to be a member of that. Initially, only the tropical countries, only the tropical countries were eligible for membership, were eligible for the membership of International Solar Alliance, only the tropical countries. But after 2020, when they made some changes, they made the rules, they changed the rules. And after 2020, any United Nations member, any country, any country which is member of United Nations is eligible, to join International Solar Alliance, eligible to join International Solar Alliance after 2020. So the changes have been introduced. After that, any country can join, like US has joined this because of the changes which were introduced. Now this, when they made introduction in the changes, they used a theme called as one sun, one world, and one grid. They use a theme called as one sun, one world, and one grid. One sun, one world, and one grid. This was a theme which was introduced in the International Solar Alliance. And the idea was to have global access, not only tropical countries, even the other countries also, to have the global access, to have the global access of solar energy, and also unite the world, and unite the world, unite the world. So this was something which changes were introduced. Now, after that, they used to meet occasionally, yearly basis. Now, the last meeting was held, which we refer them as the Sixth Assembly. Sixth Assembly was held in the year 2023. Sixth Assembly of International Solar Alliance was held in the year 2023 in Delhi. In Delhi. Now, what they decided? What are the major outcomes of this in the year 2023? The first and major outcome is universalization of energy access. Universalization of solar energy access. Solar energy access through mini grids. Mini grids. The second is to mobilize the financial resources. Mobilize financial resources. Mobilize financial resources. And the third one is diversifying the supply chain. Diversifying the supply chain of solar energy, so that the excess can be reached even to the temperate countries. even to the temperate countries. So International Solar Alliance was introduced in the year 2015, that is during the Paris conference. Is that clear? So this you should remember. International Solar Alliance, the changed aspect after 2022, and recently the thing, so that accessibility can be reached not only to the tropical, even to the temperate countries, so they can also have the access of solar energy. And solar energy is clean energy, clean energy, right? Now, India submitted its national determined contribution in the year 2018. And these are, India said that it will reduce the greenhouse gas emission 30 to 35% below 2005 by 2030. India also said that 40% of India's power capacity would be based on non-fossil fuel. That is, India will be moving towards renewable energy. Renewable energy includes solar, wind, etc. Solar, wind, etc. Right? Like OTEC, ocean thermal energy conversion. All these are referred as renewable energy. Renewable energy. And India says that it will create additional carbon sink of 2.5 billion tons by 2030. It means it will initiate more amount of forests. It will grow more forests. So this is India's perspectives. Now, next is when we talk about these definitions are important. What is NDC? I have mentioned here. Then to implement the Paris Agreement, one fund which was set up in the year 2010 plays a significant role, and we refer that as Green Climate Fund. And this Green Climate Fund was set up in the year 2020, and where the financial assistance is given to the developing countries, where the monies are contributed by developed countries which contribute and provide financial assistance, right? So Green Climate Fund in the year 2010. They will not ask in detail. Remember that this fund will help in implementing the Paris Agreement. It provides financial assistance to the developing countries and island countries which are having the major problems. Right. Now, you have to understand something called as carbon budget. Very word which is used often and often. Now, what is the Paris Agreement? Paris Agreement say that make possibilities so that the global average temperature is not increasing 2 degrees centigrade by end of this century, that is 2100. If possible, keep it to 1.5 degrees centigrade, not exceeding 1.5 degrees centigrade compared to 1850 and 1900. We refer that as pre-industrial level by 2100. Now, in that case, there is a gap in which we can emit carbon dioxide or greenhouse gases. Right? Because the cap is not to exceeding 200 degrees. So the amount of carbon dioxide which can be emitted cumulatively by the developed countries and developing countries within the limit of 2 degrees centigrades is referred as carbon budget. So the amount of carbon dioxide, total amount of carbon dioxide permitted over a period, still to keep a chance to be less than 1.5 degrees, we refer that as carbon budget. And India has said that in the year 2023, almost all 80% of carbon budget is utilized by developed countries. India has said that 80% of the carbon budget is utilized by the developed countries. So it means that again, there is a less scope for the developing countries. So it indicates the cumulative amount of carbon dioxide that we can still emit to keep the Paris Agreement to reach before that 2100. Now this created a benchmark. This created a benchmark. That is the progress of government, the progress of governments of all the countries and their climatic goals. Progress which is made by every countries, and this progress is assessed by NDCs, national determined contribution. So by checking the NDCs, we can easily assess that what amount of carbon dioxide is emitted and what amount of carbon dioxide still we can emit. And this ultimately led to development of a concept called as, if we keep on emitting more amount of carbon dioxide, then there is no possibility that we can make restriction of the average temperature to reach to 2 degrees centigrade, well below that pre-industrial level. It is not possible. So what else can be done? So what else can be done is that you have to remove the atmospheric carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. You have to remove the atmospheric carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. It means that you should make balance between what you are emitting and what you are taking out of that. So there should be a balance between emission and taking out. If a country is emitting 10 units of carbon dioxide, then the country should take out 10 units of carbon dioxide, either by natural process or by using technology. Understand this. If a country A is emitting 10 units of carbon dioxide, 10 units of carbon dioxide in a year, in a year, in a year. Now this country should remove that 10 units from the atmosphere. It should absorb that 10 units from the atmosphere. In the same year, say if it is 2030, in the year 2030, if a country A is emitting 10 units of carbon dioxide, then in the same year 2030, it has to absorb that 10 units. So it means it should balance between its emission and removal. It should maintain the balance between the emission and removal. And we refer this as something called as carbon neutrality. We refer this as carbon neutrality. Carbon neutrality. Is that clear? So this is to reach a net zero emission or carbon neutrality. That is balance between carbon dioxide released and removal it from the atmosphere. So this carbon budget plays a very, very important role, that where the countries have reached, what amount of carbon dioxide we are emitting, and what is the possibility that we may reach to the Paris Agreement objectives, or we may breach the Paris Agreement objectives. So this helps us to understand and analyze that by 2050 where we will stand, where our progress are there. And it also led a concept called as carbon neutrality. The way in which we are moving, it is very, very difficult to maintain the Paris Agreement. So what best can be done is, you are emitting, but the same amount of carbon dioxide you can remove from the budget. You can remove from the budget so that it can balance the Paris Agreement. So ultimately, it created something called as a concept of carbon neutrality, that is removing of the atmospheric carbon dioxide. And we will discuss that in detail, what is this carbon neutrality. But understand, carbon neutrality means the balance between what you are emitting and what you are taking out. If you are emitting 10 units, you should take out 10 units in that year. In that year, we refer that as carbon neutrality. Right now, COP24, which was in Katowice, the major objective of COP24 or Katowice, that we wanted to implement Paris Agreement. We wanted to implement Paris Agreement from 2020. Right. So from 2020, when we want to implement Paris Agreement, we needed an operating manual. We needed an operating manual. To implement Paris Agreement. This operating manual, which is required to implement the Paris Agreement, is referred as rule book. So it was decided in the Katowice that we will make the rule book before 2019, so that from 2020 we will start implementing Paris Agreement. by 2019, so that we can start implementing Paris Agreement by 2020. Now, this rule book should consist of same transparency framework which was highlighted in the Paris Agreement. Countries to provide their national determined contributions, volunteer, mitigation and adaptation measures in the context of climate change. Then details of financial supports, what the developed countries are giving to the developing countries. Right. Now remember that this Katowice is in country Poland. Katowice is in Poland. Now this Poland is holding the COP for the third time. It is for the third time. Right. So before that, it was in Warsaw, it was in Poznan, and now it is in Katowice. So remember that the Poland has hosted the COP for 3 times. Poland has hosted COP for 3 times. Right. So Warsaw, Poznan, and Katowice. Is it clear? So this is some rough idea about COP24. The major objective is to create an operating manual for implementing of the Paris Agreement. Right. Now understand the aspects of that. Katowice package or rule book. Every country has to submit their volunteer national determined contribution. They should communicate their efforts to adapt the climatic impacts. Now, you don't have to by heart them, but remember that. How to conduct the global stock take. Global stock make assessment every 5 years. Facilitate implementation of Paris Agreement in prompt way. In the prompt way. So all these were to be included in the operating manual. In the operating manual of Paris Agreement. Right. Then we reached to year 2019. We reached to the year 2019. We promised that we will be creating operating manual. Then we reached to the COP25 Madrid. Now the major outcomes of the COP25 were not encouraging. Aim to finalize the rule book was not done. It was pending. And the problem associated with the setting up of rules of carbon market was the problem. Here the issue started was the developing countries. More specifically, you can take India, Brazil, etc. So India, Brazil, etc., developing countries, by keeping the word which is given by Kyoto Protocol, they developed many carbon credits. And these carbon credits which were developed by them were unsold. So these countries have large amount of unsold carbon credits. Unsold carbon credits were there. Now these countries, they started questioning UNFCCC that you told in Kyoto Protocol that developing countries will produce the carbon credits and developed countries will purchase from that. And we believed in your words and started creating the carbon credits. But now we are having large amount of unsold carbon credits and you are moving directly to Paris Agreement. Now, what we have to do with these unsold carbon credits? Where we have to dispose them? Where we have to get the financial assistance to that? And again, they also told that how we have to believe that what you have did in the Kyoto Protocol, you will not do in the Paris Agreement. You told something in the Kyoto Protocol and you are not completely justified your stand. We have large amount of unsold carbon credit. Where we have to sell them? And how we have to believe that the Paris Agreement, what you are moving, the second strategy will be ideally suitable for developing countries. How we can believe that it will take the consideration of the developing countries as well. So hence there was a tussle between the developed countries and developing countries regarding unsold carbon credits. And this was also not settled. The argument was there. Developed countries, they said that we can't do anything more on that. But the developing countries, they wanted that when you have told, you give me some way, you give me one path, you give me one idea that how to settle this carbon credits, that is unsold carbon credits. And we have created that on your consideration. We have created that on your world. So we have kept your word. You fulfill your demands. You fulfill what you have given. what word you have given. So that's what this carbon market negotiation was not done. So hence, generally we say COP25 as a failure. As a failure, it did not reach to any type of negotiation, right? Then here you should understand three terms which pop up in the climate change perspective: adaptation, mitigation, and loss and damages, right? Now, adaptation, mitigation, and loss and damage. So what is adaptation? Adaptation means process of adjusting to the current and future climate change. Adapting to the present and future climate change. How? By altering the behavior and system of life. Now, what behavior you're talking and what system of life? System of life means changing from chemical fertilizers to organic farming, changing towards organic farming or natural farming. Then making proper solid waste management, making proper solid waste management. In agriculture, in agriculture, you grow the crops which are resistant crops, drought resistant, flood resistant, that is resilience crops. Use clean energies, try to put clean energies, use more clean energy. It means that you change your system of life, you change your system of life. So these are referred as the behavioral change by which you can adapt to the impact of climate change. And also any areas where floods are there, any areas where floods are dominant, you construct a artificial embankment or natural embankment. You construct an embankment there. Embankment are there. If any disasters are vulnerable, like droughts and floods are there, you analyze the risk. You analyze the risk and manage the risk. Manage the risk. Arrange shelters to the people so that they can adapt to the impact of climate change. Arrange shelters. Provide them medical facilities so that they can adapt in the context of events like the forest fires, floods, etc. You change your lifestyle, reuse many products, recycle many products, reuse, recycle, organic farming, clean energies, proper ventilations, everything what you can do, sustainable type of life you should do. So we refer that as adaptation, so that the impact of climate change will be less. That is adaptation. Now the second one is mitigation. What is mitigation? Mitigation means reduce the emission of greenhouse gas. Reduce the emission of greenhouse gas. You start reducing greenhouse gas now. It means that start encouraging the clean energy. Clean energy. Right. Discourage the fossil fuels. So hence subsidies have to be reduced. Phasing down of fossil fuel has to be done. If you start emitting the greenhouse gas emission, maybe when you reach down to 2050, the amount of greenhouse gas emission in the year 2050 will be less. So if the greenhouse gas emission is less in the 2050, then the adaptation becomes easy. Then the adaptation becomes easy. Adaptation will become easy. Right. So keeping that in the longer term, so by 2050, if you start working from today, you start reducing the greenhouse gas emission. So when you reach to the 2050, large amount of greenhouse gas emission will not be there, and that phase will help for the developing countries, poor countries, to adapt to the impact of climate change. That will reduce the cyclone numbers. They can reduce the flood incidence. They can make the countries which are vulnerable to control their aspects. So we refer that as mitigation. So one is adaptation and one is mitigation. Both are two different terms. Adaptation means reducing the greenhouse gas emission from today as a policy for longer period of a time. And by the time when you reach to the 2050, the amount of greenhouse gas emission will be less. You have mitigated means reducing, mitigate, reducing, so that the adaptation will become easy in the later stage. Now last one is loss and damage. Any country which have adapted and mitigated, so in spite of in spite of doing adaptation, in spite of mitigating, when the losses occur, when the losses occur, we refer that as loss and damages. So it is the destructive impact of climate change that cannot be avoided either by adaptation or by mitigation. So in spite of adapting, in spite of mitigation, when the losses occur, we refer that as the loss and damage. And the developing countries were demanding that we need a separate loss and damage fund. The developing countries, they were demanding a separate loss and damage fund. So developed countries were saying that you can take the loss and damage fund from adaptation and mitigation only. We can't create a separate loss and damage fund. We can't create that. And there was a tussle between developing and developed countries regarding loss and damage fund. And ultimately, in the COP28, a separate fund was created. A separate fund was created for loss and damage. Separate fund was created for loss and damage. And this will be monitored by World Bank. This loss and damage fund will be monitored by World Bank. Is it clear? So henceforth, when we talk about the term adaptation, it is different. Mitigation, it is different. Loss and damage, it is different. So please remember these terminologies. Adaptation is different, mitigation is different, and loss and damage, in spite of doing all that, when the losses occur, we refer that as LND, loss and damage, in the context of climate change. Is it clear? Okay. Now, COP26, what we say, make or break. Now, here you should understand some aspect. So, in the context of the COP20, that is in the year 2020, the session was postponed due to COVID. The session was postponed to COVID, and this was held in the year 2021. Which was held in the year 2021. Now, here you should understand certain aspects. In the year 2009, the developed countries, they made an accord called as Copenhagen Accord. The developed countries, the countries which said that yes, I'll be providing the financial assistance, they called it as Copenhagen Accord. Copenhagen Accord, where the developed countries agreed that they will contribute $100 billion every year in the context of climate change. And this is called as the climate finance. Which they say that we will be giving $100 billion every year as a part of CBDR, as a part of common but differentiated responsibilities, where they are to provide technical and financial assistance. And which was in the year 2009. They agreed to that. Yes, we will be giving $100 billion every year. And it continued here. They did not provided what they told. They provided very limited amount. Very limited amount of money was accumulated. Not complete. Very limited amount was there. And as it was not fulfilled, during the Kyoto Protocol, Kyoto period and all, we reached to the Paris. Conference. That is when we talk about the 2018 part. So there, this Paris conference, which was held in the year 2015. So here they calculated that they are not making any type of financial assistance. And during that, in the Paris conference in 2015, they said that, they affirmed that we will be giving $100 billion, which we have promised in Copenhagen Accord. They promised, but they never fulfilled. Again, they affirmed that yes, we will be giving $200 billion every year. And this is what the Paris Agreement was. They said that you have not given anything. You're not given anything. At least you provide this $100 billion for at least 5 years. That is from 2020 to 2025. At least you provide the financial assistance, $100 billion every year to that. This is what they offered. And in 2018, they found nothing was made properly, nothing was done. And when they reached to the COP21, right, so there they found that nothing strong accumulation was done. Nothing strong accumulation was done. Nothing was done to that. Nothing good accumulation was done to the climate finance. They did not contributed $100 billion. They did not contributed $100 billion. When they reached to the COP21, that is Glasgow, COP21 in the Glasgow, after that COVID part, then in the Glasgow, it said that whatever money you are promised in the Paris Agreement, you are not given by 2021. You're not given by 2022, right? So at least you fulfill that. At least you fulfill that for at least remaining last 3 years. It says that at least for 2023, 2024, and 2025, at least for these 3 years, you give that $100 billion every year. $100 billion every year, right? So $100 billion every year, it says. $100 billion every year. Sorry, COP26. $100 billion you should give at least. You give at least that the developing countries will have a financial assistance to that. So it told that at least you implement for a period of 2023 to 2025. At least you fulfill that. So this is how the legacy of the climate finance started. And ultimately, when we reach to the COP27, then the developing countries, they found that it is not going to make any goodwill for them. So they wanted huge financial assistance. They wanted that these developed countries are not fulfilling what the demands which have been done, and hence they wanted a new climate finance which can replace the climatic finance. So developing countries wanted a financial mechanism new financial mechanism which can replace the existing climate finance, which they highlighted in COP27, and COP26. So this is all about the climatic finance perspectives, which was said. So developed countries never contributed what they promised initially. Is that clear? Now we'll move on to understand the COP26. COP26. So COP26 were in the Glasgow. Here, countries reaffirmed the Paris Agreement goal of limiting the increasing average temperature. Because there was a gap, they reaffirmed that yes, we will be making their achievements. We will be reaching there. Now, what are the outcomes of the COP26? Outcomes of COP26 are countries agreed to the provision of the calling of phasing down of coal. Now, don't get confused. Phasing down means slowly discouraging the usage of coal. Phasing down of coal and phasing out subsidies. Right? And phasing out subsidies. Phasing out of insufficient subsidies. So if the subsidies are phased out, then the cost of the coal will become higher. And by that, the usage will be diluted. Right? Then the completion of rule book of Paris Agreement was done. It was completed. Then the carbon trade was also settled. This carbon trade was also settled. Now, how the settlements were there? They told that the countries which are having unsold carbon credit, the developing countries which are having the unsold carbon credits, and it has given a date for that unsold carbon credits, or the carbon credits which were produced between June 1, 2013 up to up to December 30, 2020. So in between these, any unsold carbon credit or the carbon credit which are produced and unsold are there. So these carbon credits, the country can use them to show their NDC. The country can use them in the first cycle of their NDCs. What are NDCs? The national determined contribution. You can show that, yes, I have reduced this amount of carbon dioxide in my premises. And hence, it was somewhat settled. Somewhat it was settled that though developing countries can use them, they can use them as the first cycle of national determined contribution. Not all, only the first cycle of national determined contribution. And when they made assessment of carbon budget, when they made an assessment of carbon budget and assessment was done, they identified that NDCs are not sufficient to reach the Paris Agreement. NDCs are not sufficient to reach the Paris Agreement. So hence, during this conference, they asked the countries to resubmit the restructured NDCs. It asked the countries to restructure their national determined contribution and resubmit them so that the countries can contribute more to reducing of greenhouse gas. Because remember, NDCs are voluntary. You can't force any countries. Only you can tell them to restructure and come back and increase them. So this is what the new NDCs were asked to be resubmitted. Right. Then Global Methane Pledge was done, where 103 countries, including 15 major emitters, signed the Global Methane Pledge to emit 30% of 2030 by 2030 of 2020 level. Now, India is not a part of this. India said no for this, because India is a developing country. Suddenly, it can't decrease its methane production. So, India is not a part of that. India has not signed global methane pledge. Then halt and reverse degradation, forest degradation, where they said that land degradation by 2030 will be done. Now India again said that it is not a part of that. Why? Because already I have made a promise in Delhi Declaration. Already India has made promise in Delhi Declaration. Delhi Declaration, that is the land degradation neutrality by 2030. Two ways how I can do. Two things cannot be done. The same objectives cannot be done in two programs. So hence already I have taken that land degradation neutrality by 2030. So hence India is not a part of this 2030, but India has taken Delhi Declaration as a very positive approach in making land degradation neutrality by 2030. Then at least the initiation of loss and damage was initiated. We refer that as Glasgow dialogue. So in the Glasgow dialogue, at least they initiated something that yes, we should have a separate fund of loss and damage, right? So it is something called as Santiago Network. That is, Santiago talks about the technical assistance which can be given to the developing countries. Technical assistance which is given to the developing countries in the context of floods, droughts, etc. Finance you are giving, okay, but you have to provide a technical assistance also, knowledge base. You transfer technologies to them so that they can use them in adapting the impact of climate change, right? So they agree to strengthen the technical assistance. So Santiago means technical assistance, knowledge based transfer of technologies to the developing countries so that they can also reduce the impact of climate change. And there was something, a Glasgow dialogue. Yes, we will initiate something, and this Glasgow dialogue ultimately led to creation of something called as the new loss and damage fund. This Glasgow dialogue initiated led to the formation of a separate fund called as loss and damage fund in COP28. Right. Next, funding for adaptation. I told you what is adaptation. Adapting by changing behavior. And it was called to double the financial support, doubling the financial assistance in the context of adaptation to the developing countries. Right. And also establishment work program which can define the global goal of adaptation. And here you should remember that adaptation is before the event. It is not about crisis, it is about risk assessment. Risk assessment. So it is about understanding the climate crisis, which are already affecting many countries, impact of that. Right. So here it is about understanding the risk and utilizing them in the initial stage. Initial day. So every country is facing the impact of that. So you have to adapt that by changing behavior, constructing shelters, constructing embankments, providing medical facilities, providing them good knowledge. So all these are called as adapting yourself, preparing yourself in the event of any such activity. So prevention is better than cure, what we say. So preparing yourself is adaptation, right? Then climate finance. Climate finance. So here they discussed that. They discussed that what was reaffirmed in the Paris Agreement. They said that at least you bring that in the year 2023. Developed countries in report, they said that at least you bring that from 2023 to 2025. So here it is only requesting which is done to the developed countries. There are no penalties for why they are not contributing. You don't fine them. You can't impose penalties. You can't impose fines to the developing countries for not contributing to the money there. You are just requesting them to contribute what you told in the $100 billion as a part of your climatic finance. So again, they told a soft language, you please contribute something which is $100 billion what you assured in 2023 to 2025, right? Then India and its role in COP26. India has given its five policies. We refer them as five nectars. Five nectars. And these five nectars are referred as the Pancha or Panchamrita of India's. Five nectars or Panchamrita. That is, India will get its non-fossil energy capacity to 500 gigawatts. That is, India will move towards non-renewable energy. Non-renewable energy. Second, it says that India will meet 50% of its energy requirement to the renewable energy by 2030. India will reduce its projected carbon emission to 1 billion ton by 2030. And India says that India says that it will make sure that the carbon intensities of 45% will be done by 2030. And India said it will achieve net zero or carbon neutrality by 2070. China 2060, many countries 2050, but India says that it will reach to carbon neutrality by 2070. And during the event, e-Amrit, with the web portal on electric vehicle was launched. Web portal on electric vehicle was launched, and developing countries demanded that we need $1 trillion as climatic finance. What they are promising is $100 billion. It is very, very less. We need $1 trillion in the climatic finance, or else it becomes major problem for us to adapt, mitigate, and make ourselves available in the context of climatic issues. Right. So when we talk about that, India will get its non-fossil energy capacity. Apologies for that. Renewable energy. Apologies for that. Renewable energy, or we say clean energy. Clean energies. Non-fossil means clean energies. Clean energies. Current apologies for that. It is renewable energy. Renewable. So India will get non-fossil energy. Non-fossil energy means it talks about clean energy, like solar, wind, etc. Clean energies. Right. So here India will get non-fossil energy capacity by 500. Non-fossil means without the fossils. So non-fossil means electric energy, wind energy, solar energy. So we refer them as renewable energies or non-fossil. Non-fossil means clean energies, clean energy like OTEC, ocean thermal energy conversion, etc. So we refer them as the non-fossil, because fossil fuels are those which are emitting large amount of greenhouse. So remember, non-fossil means clean energies, nuclear energy, Otek energy, wind energies, we refer them as non-fossil, and that is correct one, non-fossil energy. I mentioned instead of renewable, I mentioned non, so that non word was a mistake. Apology for that. Right. And this is what India's point in the COP26. COP26. Then we moved on to India, which submitted its updated national determined contribution. So these are updated India's national determined contribution. Updated national determined contribution. So updated national determined contributions are that India will reduce its emission intensity by 45% of 2005 level by 2030. India will achieve about 50% of cumulative electric power capacity, which is non-fossil fuel based by 2030. India says that it will create an additional carbon sink, that is creating more amount of forest covers, so that this forest will make more amount of carbon sequestration, absorbing of the carbon dioxide, right? And also it also says that in the context of adaptation, we need to develop a healthy and sustainable lifestyle, healthy and sustainable lifestyle. And here it talks about life, that is lifestyle for environment, lifestyle for environment. It is a global mass movement with individual as well as collective, and this is based on the P3 perspective, that is pro planet people. And here you have to change your behavioral change, bring good practices, so that adaptation becomes easy. And if the adaptations are standard one, then the loss and damages will be less. Loss and damages will be less here. So these are the facts which you should keep in the mind when you are talking about. Yes, life is similar to mission life, both are there. So when you are implementing life is same as mission life, it is same, both are same. Yes, Kennedy, both are same. Right. Now, emission gap report. Now, this emission gap report is a report which is always released by United Nations Environment Program, UNEP. Now, what is the significance of emission gap report? So, the moment when we say emission gap report, so this gap report is released by UNEP every year. And what the gap it finds? The gap is about the Paris Agreement and countries' policy. It is a gap between the Paris Agreement and the countries' committed policies, the countries which they are committed to reach that Paris Agreement. So, what gaps are there? So, these gaps are referred as emission gap report. Emission gap report. So, it is the gap between the countries' pledges, the gap between the countries' pledges on greenhouse gas emission and the reduction required to reach the Paris Agreement. And this gap is calculated. This gap is calculated by making a complete study of NDCs which are submitted by the countries. NDCs which are submitted by the countries. So every country, when they give their NDCs, the IPCC studies that. IPCC studies that, and it tells that if these NDCs are there, if country will implement these NDCs, then we will reach to this stage that we can not meet the Paris Agreement objectives. So hence the gap which is created, the gap which is there between the country's commitment and the Paris Agreement, which is studied by NDCs, is referred as emission gap report. Emission gap report, and this is released by United Nations Environment Program. Now here you don't have to buy all the reports, but the report which was given in 2019 is very important. In the year 2019 the report was given because in the year 2018 all the countries submitted their NDCs. The country submitted their national determined contribution in the year NDC. So it studied all the NDCs by the year 2019. And then in the year 2019, after studying the reports, it said that after studying the NDCs which were submitted, it studied that and said that to keep 2 degrees centigrade, the global average temperature to keep below 2 degrees centigrade, the total amount of carbon dioxide emission, by 2030, it should be under 41 gigawatt, gigatons, under 41 gigatons. And if we want to make the 1.5 degrees centigrade, the global average temperature, to keep 1.5 degrees annual global temperature, to keep below 1.5 degrees, then the total emission, the total carbon dioxide emission by the year 2030, it should be under 25 gigaton. It should be under 25 gigatons. So it means, it highlighted that if we want to meet the Paris Agreement, the total carbon emission by all the countries, which have signed their NDCs, by 2030, it should be below 41 gigawatts, below 41 gigatons. And if we want to keep it to 1.5 degrees, then the total emission should be below 25 gigatons. So remember this, 25 gigatons for keeping 1.5 degrees, and 41 gigatons to keep 2 degree centigrade below the pre-industrial level, that is 1850 to 1900. Panchamrit and updated NDCs have same common points. They are having the same common points, but they are different. So if they ask Panchamrit, you should write separately. If they ask updated NDC, they are separate. Never mix them. The parts of NDCs are reflected in Panchamrit, but Panchamrits and updated NDCs are two different points. There may be overlapping, but they are two different entities. Is it clear? So remember these points. Right. Pro means which pro you are asking? Program. Now, this is the 2019. Now, the emission gap report which was given in the year 2023 is very important. The report which was given in the year 2023. Pro means benefit of. Pro means friendly towards planet. Pros towards the planet. Pro planet people. It means that towards the planet, towards the people. Right? Pro means towards, advantage, benefit, etc. Okay. Now, emission gap report of 2023 is very vital. It says that the greenhouse gas emission hit a new record of 57.4 gigatons of carbon dioxide in 2022. So in the year 2022, the greenhouse gas emission is 57.4 gigatons, and it is 1.2% increase from previous year. So rather than decreasing, we are increasing. Then there is only 14% chance of limiting the global warming to 1.5 over pre-industrial level, considering the restructured or resubmitted NDCs also. So very difficult to reach the Paris Agreement. And it also says that even if you meet all the NDCs, even if all the existing national determined contributions are met, the restructured one, if you meet all them, then by 2030, the world will warm by 2.5 degrees, breaching the target of Paris Agreement. It means that these NDCs will not support. To keep the Paris Agreement. So if we keep only on NDCs, it will not meet the Paris Agreement. I'm not telling that they're defective. Only NDCs will not make the Paris Agreement to reach here. It suggested that this NDCs are not sufficient to reach to the Paris Agreement. to reach to the Paris Agreement. And hence it says that along with NDC, we have to go for carbon neutrality. Along with NDC, the countries has to go for carbon neutrality. Carbon neutrality. So then only we can reach to the Paris Agreement. That is NDC plus carbon neutrality. So it says that if you go with NDC plus carbon neutrality, then there is a possibility that we may reach to the Paris Agreement. So it emphasizes that carbon neutrality is inevitable. Carbon neutrality is mandatory to reach to the Paris Agreement. Right? So it says that the G20 countries are collectively responsible for emitting three-fourths of the present carbon dioxide. And of the greenhouse gas emission, two-thirds come from fossil fuels or fuel-based. So it means that fossil fuels are still the major contributors. So by September 2023, 97 countries have submitted their net zero pledges. So hence it highlighted that this net zero pledge or carbon neutrality is vital in the context of Paris Agreement. So hence it says that need for carbon dioxide removal strategies, which will lead to carbon neutrality. Right. So remember, carbon neutrality was not in the Paris Agreement. It was not in the Paris Agreement. Slowly it was added by IPCC reports, etc. So now it is very strong that to maintain the Paris Agreement, we need to go with the carbon neutrality, or else we can't reach to that target. Right. Then COP27, which was held in the year 2022, and this was held in Sharm el Sheikh, Egypt. It was held in Egypt. That is Sharm el Sheikh. Now, what are the outcomes of that? The outcomes of that is to accelerate the phasing down the coal powers and phase out inefficient fossil subsidies. This is what we did in 2020 also, phasing down the unabated coal power and phasing out inefficient fuel subsidies to reduce the greenhouse gas in many sectors, applicable sectors like road sectors, construction sectors, etc. So wherever we find many sectors are there. In the road sectors, use electric vehicles. Construction sectors use efficient energy so that the fossil fuels are less used in them. So that's why we initiated electric vehicles on the roads. Right. So in many sectors, so through increasing renewable energy and low emission energy, agreed to dedicated fund for loss and damage. Yes, now they agreed that we will go for loss and damage, and this was created in next COP. It was created in COP 28. Right. Then mobilizing money for developing countries. You have to mobilize money, or else it is very difficult for the developing countries for their survival. Then it also talks about new collective quantified goal on climate finance, and this will replace the climate finance. This will replace the climate finance, which the developed countries said that we will be giving the $100 billion by 2024. So this will be replacing the climate finance. This will be replacing the climatic finance, and this will start implementing from 2025. So by 2024 they will make all the provisions, and by 2025 this will be implemented. It will be implemented by 2025. Right. Then Global Mangrove Alliance was there, and we discussed that it is an initiation of Indonesia and UAE, and India, Japan, Sri Lanka, and 6 countries were part of that. That is protecting the mangroves and also making the socio-economic development, because mangroves are referred as carbon sink. Mangroves are the carbon sink. It means they can store large amount of carbon dioxide. So they play an important role in reducing greenhouse gas. So hence mangroves, global mangroves alliance was initiated there. Is it clear? Now the last one is COP28. COP28, which was held in December 2023 in Dubai, which was held in Dubai. Dubai. Now here the important outcomes are. It said very clearly that the loss and damage fund will be from the loss and damage fund will be adopted, and this loss and damage fund will be managed by World Bank at least for 4 years. At least for 4 years. And this loss and damage fund will be serviced by new dedicated and independent secretariat. And we are not clarity on how it will be working. So maybe in another 2 or 3 months, they will give a detailed idea that how, which secretariat and how independent it will be. But it is sure that it will be independent. It will not be clubbed with adaptation and mitigation. It is separate. It will be separate, right? And it will have their own guidances. It will have their own guidances, which were to implement the Paris Agreement. So it will be an independent, separate fund. Then fossil fuel phase out. So here they made a strong statement transitioning away from fossil fuel to renewable energy. Transitioning from fossil fuels to renewable energy, to clean energy. Right. It means that they agreed that we will make the transition. We will make the transition from fossil fuels to clean energy so that we can reach to the net zero or carbon neutrality by 2050. So the term is transforming from fossil to clean energy. Then global stock take. So global stock take is assessment of the countries that where they have reached, what policies they have did and what they have reached, right? It is to assess their ndcs with reference to Paris Agreement. Assessment of ndcs with reference to Paris Agreement, whether they have worked very well what they told in the ndcs, or what shortcomings are there. Identify what they told, and also to check what possibilities are there, what possibilities can be done to maintain the Paris Agreement objective, so it is a track of their objectives. It is the track of objectives and suggest measures what they have to do, suggest what they have to do. And hence it studied all the ndcs. The global stock take means all the ndcs. So this is a global stock take first global stock take, and this global stock take is a cycle which is done every 5 year. So this is the first global stock take which is committed in the Paris Agreement, right? And here it has studied all that, and it found that the climate finance which channelized by multilateral, bilateral and private sources taken together are very short, are far short of trillions eventually, far short of the trillions eventually, needing to the support of developing countries with clean energy. So it means that the present steps are not feasible. The present NDCs, the present NDCs will not make us to reach to the Paris Agreement. So hence it suggested many measures. That it told that you triple the renewable energy, you triple the renewable energy, like atomic energies, etc. It suggested that while doing that, you make proper adaptation facilities. Right? It suggested many such parameters. So eight such parameters it suggested 8 such parameters. You shift to clean energies, you move towards adaptation part, enhance your capacities. So it gave many such criterias. If you perform these 8 parameters, then there is a possibility that we may reach to the Paris Agreement perspectives, right? So global stock take was not satisfied with the country's approach, not satisfied with the country's approach in reaching the Paris Agreement, right? Then it was decided that there should be a tripling in the renewable energy capacities by 2030. Apart from that, many companies, many companies, many companies, international oil companies, many companies, it can be national or international companies, they said that voluntarily that 40% of global production of fossil fuels are from them. They said that they will be reaching to the net zero emission by a decarbonization charter, by signing this decarbonization charter. And this decarbonization charter, it consists of three major aims. Three major aims. The first aims, what these companies, oil companies, they said that they will be achieving the net zero emission. They will be achieving the net zero emission in each of the companies, in each of the companies before 2050. Before 2050. Then second, it says that to achieve near zero, this is near zero methane, near zero methane leakage from the production of oil and gas by 2030. And third, it says that third is to achieve zero routine flaring by 2030. So these are the three aims, what we say: carbon neutrality, second, reducing near zero by methane, and third one is, so when the fossil fuels are burned, so they will emit greenhouse gas. So achieving zero routine flaring, burning of the gases by 2030. So we will use a technology by which the emission of the carbon dioxide or greenhouse gas will be reduced. So these are by the companies. These are by the companies. So this was also proposed systematically. And the major thing was regarding climate finance. Climate finance. And here, United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. Trade and Development. United Nations Conference on Trade, Trade and Development estimates that developed nations should provide $500 billion, $500 billion under a new collective quantified goal. And this new collective quantified goal will start operating from 2025. Will start operating from 2025. And this will replace the Copenhagen Accord, what they told that we will be reaching to $100 billion. It says that that will not sufficient. So hence, $500 billion will be implemented with the new collective quantified goals. And in that, it has said that, in that it says that out of this $500 billion, the $200 billion will be used for mitigation. $250 billion will be used for mitigation. $100 billion for adaptation. $100 billion for adaptation. And the remaining $150 billion will be for a separate loss and damage. $150 billion for loss and damage. 150 billions for loss and damage. Is that clear? Then it also made global goal on adaptation. We refer that as global goal on adaptation framework. Now, what is adaptation? Changing the behavior, organic farming, clean energies, reusing, then making lifestyle in such a way that sustainable approaches are reached, right? So which identifies that world needs to get in order to resilient means resist and recover very quickly to the impact of climate change. So the adaptation part, what we say, that is before the event which we take place, we refer that as pre-disaster aspect, that is talking about the risk. You prepare yourself in the initial stage by creating large amount of the necessity structures which are required. Necessity structures required like embankments, shelters, medicine, food, storage, awareness, knowledge base, all should be required. And we refer that as global goal on adaptation framework. So these are the important outcomes of COP28. COP28. Now this year COP29 will be in Azerbaijan. So there they will explain in detail about how this loss and damage fund will be operating and how this new collective quantified goal will be operating. Right. Now, 5 assessment reports which were given by IPCC. Another 5 minutes, then we can wind up the session. Another 5 minutes, then we'll wind up. 5 assessment reports by IPCC. These assessment reports plays an important role. The first assessment report was in the year 1990, which plays an important role in creating UNFCC, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Then the second assessment report was in the year 1995. And here the second assessment report plays an important role in adopting Kyoto Protocol. And the third assessment report was in the year 2021. Here it highlighted that man-made factors are responsible for climate change. Anthropogenic means man-made factors. Man-made factors are responsible for climate change. So it very strictly said that the present climate change is contributed by man-made activities. That is releasing of greenhouse gases. And it says that in the fourth assessment report, which is 2007, it says that we should make sure that integration of climate change, integrating the climate change policies with sustainable development policies. You should integrate them. And you should always make a proper adaptation. You should make a proper relationship between mitigation and adaptation. Don't get confused. Mitigation is different, adaptation is different. Adaptation is different. Both are two different entities. So you should make a holistic approach. And in the fifth assessment report, it says that it is very much clear that human involvement is seen in the context of climate change. And it also says that the major contributors of greenhouse gas emission between 2000 to 2010 was from energy sector. Highest was from energy sector. Second was from industries, and the third one was from transport, and fourth one was for building. So these sectors were major contributors of the greenhouse gas. Energy sector, fossil fuels, industries, then followed by transport and building. So these were the major contributors of greenhouse gas. Energy, industry, transport, and building sector. And the last assessment was given in the year 2021 to 2023. And this assessment also plays an important role in understanding the impact of climate change. And here it gives this part. It says that a very alarming report it has released. It says the excess emission from the human activities have raised the global temperature, the present temperature, 1.1 degrees above the pre-industrial level. So forget about that 0.9. We are already reached to 1.1 degrees. So we are already reached to 1.1 degrees of pre-industrial, that is 1850 to 1900. And it says that the current climatic policies which are projected to increase, if you go with the same policies, same NDCs, same parameters, so by the end of 2100, so we will reach to 3.2 degrees higher than pre-industrial level. So it means 1.2 degrees centigrade more than what we are committed to the Paris Agreement. Paris Agreement is not exceeding 2. Now here we are reaching to 3.2. We are breaching the Paris Agreement with the current policies. Then you need to cut the greenhouse gas emission in all the sectors, road sectors, transport sectors, energy sectors, all the sectors. You should reduce greenhouse gas. Then only you can think something of Paris Agreement. And it says that public and private finances flows for fossil fuels are still major threat, and they should be reduced. And we should make increase in the adaptation and mitigation purposes, or else it becomes very problem. Then it also says that the loss and damage will affect the poor and most vulnerable. Loss and damages due to the impact of the issues like floods, droughts, forest fires, etc. So in spite of mitigation and adaptation, that has to be taken into consideration. Loss and damages will be there for poor and most vulnerable countries. They will be affecting. And hence it says that to keep the limit of 1.5 degree emission, to keep it below 1.5 degree emission, then we have to reduce 43% of the greenhouse gas emission, and at least 63%, 60% of greenhouse gas emission compared to 2019. And technically it is very, very difficult. Technically it is very, very difficult unless and until we change to an active mode. Unless and until we change to the active mode. So unless and until we reach there, it becomes very difficult. So we can conclude the today's session here, that is the break, and we can reach at 2 p.m. So we'll start the session at 2 p.m. Is it okay? We'll start the class at 2 p.m. or because after that again we can have a break of 10 or 15 minutes. We'll start the class at 2 p.m. See, because 1 hour is more than sufficient. 1 hour is more than sufficient. So 2 p.m. will start. So whatever doubts are there, you can ask me after that, Alfia. If anything is there missed, you can raise the doubt. So we'll start at 2 p.m. So 2 p.m. we'll start the topics called as Hindu Kush Himalayan report. It is a report. So I'll be mentioning that you can read that report. There won't be any such difficulty. So we'll start the class at 2 p.m. Don't get much stress. Just read them as simple as possible. It can be, right? So we'll meet up at 2 p.m.